Welcome to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. I'm Tom Kelly, your nonprofit catalyst. As the founder of Charity Auctions Today and Donor Books, I've spent almost 2 decades helping organizations like yours break through fundraising barriers, engage communities on a deeper level, and accelerate meaningful growth. In this podcast, along with my incredible guests, we'll uncover transformational ideas, tackle challenges head-on, and share insider strategies that you won't find anywhere else. Each episode is designed to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark and beyond, because impact doesn't scale by chance, it scales by choice. So let's get started. Emily, thank you so much for being on the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast today.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Now, this is a conversation that I have whether I'm speaking on stage or talking with different nonprofits, and everybody talks about storytelling. And I know today we're going to go into kind of formalizing storytelling about a nonprofit to help maybe formalize different processes and hopefully bring in more donations. But I'd love to just kind of start with the first question of, you talk about, creating a case for support for different nonprofits, and that's what you do to help them grow and raise more money. But how is that different from storytelling or crafting a story? Can you kind of explain the difference between storytelling and a more formal case for support?
Sure. And I think the word storytelling can be interpreted in many different ways. It's like innovation. What are we really talking about? So I think storytelling, a lot of people know their organization's story and they can tell that. And that's great. But when we think of leveling up fundraising and really trying to, get, when you have competition between other nonprofits, when you're trying to get to higher levels of funding, you need to tell a stronger story. And so a case for support can also take different formats. But when I talk about it, it's really how do you bring in all those elements that a funder needs to know, feel, think about, answer their questions. How do you bring all that together into one piece so that everyone on your team can tell that story and tell it cohesively?
Well, and I think that's kind of the most important part is, you pretty much have playbooks and standard operating procedures for every other area of your business, but a lot of times founders don't have it for their story. Why did they found this organization? Who was the first person they helped? What type of impact do they have so that they can train their team on that to basically be able to ingrain that story in them so that they can tell it to everybody they meet. And, this case for support is really that almost that standard operating procedure of that founding story, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it because I've met a lot of, executive director founders, CEO founders, and they usually have some kind of magic that, they're able to get funding, and that's wonderful. They're able to grow an organization, but once they get to a level where they need to grow beyond themselves, that story needs to get, operationalized, like you said, so that everyone can tell it. It's really a way to, again, level up your fundraising and have everyone tell that story and to just make sure your story is consistent because as you grow, more people hear it and you need it to really resonate in the same way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's probably one of the things I never hear anybody talk about is, that everybody wants that founder story, right? Because it has such an impact. And, I think a lot of founders are like, I don't really want to try to teach somebody my founder story because it's my story and I tell it the best and I want to keep telling it my way. And, this is almost a great way of teaching your team how to tell that story so that, hopefully you can, bring in more dollars. And I always have the saying of 80% done by somebody else is 100% awesome. So even though it might not be as 100% as great as you would have told it, but if they tell it 80% as well, that's still 100% awesome because you didn't have to retell that story to this individual founder that maybe one of your volunteers is sitting next to on an airplane and, is telling your founder story about the organization and it resonates with that person and they end up becoming a donor, right? There's so many opportunities there.
Yeah, well, and if your goal is to not grow, that works. Like you can kind of stay the same, but things have to get out of your own head in order to grow. And I think there's even different ways of telling a story as you grow, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Um, but you can't just keep it, you can only be in so many places at once. There's a limit. There's still a human limit to founders, um, even when they tell a great story. And so that's really where I love to help organizations, is to like get that out of their head and get it into more people's hands.
Yeah, I think that's great. So, walk me through the process. Like, if I was a brand new nonprofit, I don't have, I just maybe have my own perfect, story of how I founded the organization. When you came in and we started working together, what would be some of the first things that we do to start to formalize this so that we can start training my team?
Sure. Well, I think one of the areas that I really focus on is impact. I think that is an area where we can tell a story and take people on an emotional journey. But if you don't know how your organization is making a difference, it can be hard to really show. Hard to know how to talk about that. And so that's sort of one of the areas where I help organizations, is help building that impact case. But there's a lot of things that can go into a case for support. Like, you want to know the context.
So why would somebody need a case for support? And is there certain organizations where maybe one is not, now is not the time to have one, or is there a perfect time to have one, or should we just always have a case support ready to go?
I mean, it would always be helpful to have a case for support. There's not a reason to not do it, other than you might have other fires to put out. But an organization really needs it, again, when you need to grow. I think also, looking forward, there's organizations that might have less government support over the next couple of years. So organizations that might need to gain more private support. So shifting support or growing, I think, is an area where it's really helpful to have. And part of it is because, when you build new relationships with funders, they want to know why you're doing this work. They also want to connect with the people you're serving. They want to know, how is what you're doing perceived? How is it changing the communities that you work with? How are you building community? There's all these things that, like, you can tell a story, but you, if it's just in your own head, you might not hit all the points that funders need to know. And it's great if you're a person who is super compelling and able to be persuasive in that way. But a lot of funders are being very careful with where their money goes. And so you really need to be able to kind of making sure you're hitting all those points. And they want to see the change that you're making, um, as well as they might need some context. They might not understand the work that you do. Some funders are not experts at whatever your mission is. And so to be able to give them some, why are you doing this? What are you doing? What is it? What change are you making? And, what do you need? If you don't able to answer all those questions in a story that's just being, reiterated from a founder, it might not, you might not hit all the marks.
And if we were to sit down and start crafting, my case for support for my foundation, what were some of the first things that should go into it, and how would we start to kind of build one out?
Yeah, and I think for me, a lot of this is like, who's your audience here? What's their knowledge about your organization? Really, like, thinking about what level of information they need so that you can tailor that case for support for them. But I would say, I have 5 pieces that I feel like should go into every case for support, and as much as the organization has or can build out. So the first area is context. What is the organization's history? What's their specialty? What are they good at? Um, what's the challenge that they are using those skills and capacity for? And why now? What's going on now in the world, in your community, that this really makes sense. So that just kind of grounds people into what's going on that someone outside of your organization might not know about. And then the second area is your approach. This could be your values, the vision that your organization has, and the programs that you do. What are you, what sort of things are you doing in order to solve this challenge? Third area is action. So what are the results? Like, how many people are coming through your programs? Do you have photos and videos that can bring people in to those things that your team sees every day? Because again, those funders are not there, and so the more you can bring them into your work, the better. And so those first three things, a lot of organizations have. It might take some work to gather those photos, to gather the data, but a lot of them have that kind of information at hand. The next two areas are where it takes a little bit more work, but are very important when talking to a funder, because they want to know the so what. Like, what are you actually doing? Are you just, doing this work, or is it actually making a change? And so that's the fourth area, is impact. And this is where a lot of organizations can struggle to measure, because there are, and not everyone's familiar with the logic model, that there can be, outcomes or outputs that you have is what you're doing every day, but the outcomes and impact are the actual changes that you're making in the world. The, giving people a leg up, educating them in certain ways, changing their behavior. Those are all the things that we're striving for, what our mission is talking about, but they can be really hard to measure. So that's typically where I help a lot of organizations, is helping them figure out what is that change they're making in the world. Because even if you can see it, it's very hard to articulate. So, we figure out, are you, helping people gain more confidence so they can get a job? Are you helping people see the world in a broader picture so there's less segregation? Those types of things. And so that's something you can put in with testimonials, mixed in these data around measured change and success. And then lastly, certainly probably the most important, is the call to action. So the fifth area is, what are you going to do with this funding? What's the anticipated change you hope to make, whether it's continued, whether it's expanded, or something new? How can this person really be a part of all this great work that you're doing? And so these, we talk about storytelling. These are 5 pieces, right? But you still have to weave it together into a story.
And with, are there any types of metrics or data that shows, like, organizations or nonprofits that don't have a cause for support and that do have a cause for support, you have different types of success rates when, going out and looking for funding or doing different things like that?
I can't say of any metrics off the top of my head, but I've recently attended a few conferences where I was able to meet with funders, where I heard funders on a panel, and they just reiterate that they need to know what change you're making in the world. And so I think a lot of times they're still organizations with boards as well. Like, if the more clear a story can be for them, what that context is, what that problem you're solving is, and what that change you're making in the world is, the more it is clear for them, the better. Obviously it still has to align with their mission as well, but those are the organizations that rise to the top for them. And I think as a market gets more competitive, those are the stories that are going to rise to the top.
And I mean, this sounds like having that more formal process is you're going after big, more like corporate sponsorships, higher institutional maybe dollars, and maybe not necessarily like the individual donor. What does somebody that really is looking for that cause for support formal format, who are those people, and can you give us some examples of a couple types of I guess organizations or institutions that really want this?
Sure. Let's see. So are you asking like would certain types of organizations over others
Yeah,
really
so like
need a
if
case
I'm a
for support?
nonprofit and I'm looking to
Mhm.
like, all right, I know I'm going to go after, I want to go after the big money. Who is going
Yeah,
to be expecting a cause for support documentation from me
like a
to
case for
even just
support.
get me in the, yeah, get me into their onto their stack of paperwork?
Yeah, I don't know if organizations like funders are necessarily expecting it, but it is something again that helps level you up. So this isn't something that maybe an individual donor might expect. It's really more of an internal tool, even if it's shared externally. Um, and I think I'll just go back for a second for a case for support. It could be anything from a paragraph, a few paragraphs of information to a full-on, presentation that with charts and graphs and photos that really tell your story. Um, on the latter is where I really recommend. But again, it is a tool so that more of your staff can tell that story. It can, like a grant writer could look at it and pull what they need to write a grant. Um, so I wouldn't say funders are expecting it. It's just something that will help you level up. And,
Mhm.
the higher dollars you're going for, the more proof, um, proof of impact you're going to need.
Yeah, I just read this book called Going Pro, and this is kind of
Okay.
what I think about, right? So the nonprofits that want to take that next level and start going after more money and raise more money, this is kind of like that Going Pro moment where we have your formalized. Case for support so that your entire team can get on board. Everybody's talking the same language. Everybody's the same talking points as they're out there talking to different donors, whether it be individual donors or businesses or sponsorships. It's just a great way to kind of formalize that, so just everybody's on the same page, and that's just part of like going pro in your nonprofit when you want to level up. I wrote a book called The $1 Million Nonprofit, and the whole point of the book is to try to get your first $1 million in donations, right? And it's all
Hmm.
about this, going pro, mentality, and really just trying to, put in those little pieces so that it just makes it easier to hit that next level. And this case for support is just one of those pieces that you can create, get it out there with your team, get everybody on the same page, and then it doesn't have to necessarily change, but I'm sure you want to kind of take it, update it over time. But it's just one of those pieces of the puzzle that is just makes everything easier, so you don't have to repeat yourself a million times your team. And it could just be something that as part of the onboarding for new volunteers or board members, it's just part of the package.
Yeah, I'm actually working on a case for support right now. And one of the things that we're thinking about is how much information do different audiences need? And so I'm helping them build it out so that it has everything, but they can take out slides if they're going to a corporate luncheon presentation. They can add some back in if they're sharing information with a foundation that really wants a lot of detail. They could keep it short for their auxiliary board as they go out and just tell their friends about the organization. And so it is, it is that playbook that gives you everything in one place, so that you can, sometimes you have an hour to tell a story, sometimes you only have 5 minutes, and you want to make sure you um, have the information you need in all those cases.
Mm-hmm. And when you're working with some smaller nonprofits, and maybe they have little or no data, or they don't have a really good story that's compelling, that like isn't like jazzed up, you know is it possible to still help them kind of craft a great, compelling story that you can put into a case for support to really just kind of like enhance it? I'm sure if you ask enough questions, because Emily, you're the expert, right, when it comes to this.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's ways of pulling that information out of them where they might not think it was a cool thing, but you're like, this is gold. Have you ever run across that with anybody you've worked with and really just gone from zero to hero with a story that, they didn't think it was going to be great, but at the end you came out of it and you just crushed it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are, typically organizations that are in the growth phase are a little more established, but I do believe that every organization has a story. And, starting from if you're an emerging nonprofit, that is the story you're telling. And you might not have all those big impacts, but if you can gather stories from the people you're serving, um, you know, make sure you have that context that shows why your emerging nonprofit is right for this space. Um, and then, the actions you're taking, like every nonprofit has some element of that. Um, so I think that's the thing I would recommend to them is just don't just gather what you do, gather those testimonials, those impacts, no matter how small they are, because you can also tell a story of how you are leveling up. So I'll say, I tend to work with nonprofits that are like more in that growth phase. So I don't know if I have like a beginner story off the top of my head, but I will say, I've been working with this organization this year where they're an arts organization that had a very unique mission to um, help people engage with people not like them through the arts. And we talked through the impacts they thought they were making, but they knew people liked that they got a lot out of their programs, but they didn't really know what, and the ideas in their head turned out to not be right. So what I did is I helped them do research um, through their constituents, really trying to figure out what change they saw the organization making. And that's what like just blew everyone out of the water is when we asked participants, like if we reflected back the changes that we heard from them, they rated the organization so high. They were like 80 to 90% said that this organization was making a big shift in helping them meet people not like them, helping them deepen their relationships with other people. And so those were the knockout statistics that they could put in their case for support when telling funders to show that their kind of experimental model was actually making a difference in people's lives. And so they're going out right now and pushing that, and it's super exciting. They're super confident. Their board is super confident having this data. And the other cool thing is they can reflect it back to their constituents, and they recognize that change in themselves. And so it's also just helping build their community.
Mm. That's great. And if an organization like doesn't have all of the elements of your five, I don't want to call them steps. What would you call those five? Are they five
Yeah,
elements?
just
Yeah.
storytelling
So,
elements.
yeah. So if they don't have all five of those storytelling elements, what can they do now to improve their story? And, how else can you maybe help them to maybe pull those stories out of them to kind of craft the perfect case for support?
Yeah, I would start, gathering, create 5 folders, like start gathering that data, those visuals, the stories that you do have, and putting them in those buckets to make sure you're capturing everything. But like I said, the hardest ones are the impact, number 4 and 5, the ask that you're making. And so to start gathering impact data can be as simple as asking people who you serve, what did they get out of, a program? What did they get out of an experience? And just start taking those quotes. I think that is sort of the quickest way to start seeing that story from their perspective. And again, that's so strong because people cannot, they can't argue with somebody who is receiving services. Like that's the life that's changing, and that's, what donors, where they want their money to go to. So that's the start. I think leveling up is then collecting more data around those perspectives, being able to show, what that change is you're making, whether it's a percentage of change, whether it's a number of people that meet a certain criteria. Those are the things that just kind of help the heart and mind work together when telling these stories. So yeah, you can start anywhere, but where I help organizations is really kind of leveling up to that next level of you know, having stronger data, more objective data that can be integrated into that story.
And I know on your website and on your LinkedIn, you have a lot of resources that you give away for free that nonprofits can use to kind of maybe help them craft a case story and also get into your world and learn more information from you. What's the best way for anybody listening today to kind of learn more about what you do and maybe, access some of those materials?
Yeah, well, I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. I'm always posting, tips and sort of articulating impact and story and how you can integrate that into your work. So I'd love to connect with anyone there. Happy to share ideas in the comments. And then I just put out a white paper called Storytelling with Substance that talks about qualitative research and how you can use that to really tell a strong story for fundraising. So I think you have a link you'll be able to share with our listeners. But I think that's a great way to get started.
Yeah, and we're going to include that link and links to your LinkedIn and your website so that everybody can go to the bio and the description and get into your world there. Emily, thank you so much for being on the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast today. This has been a great learning information about more about creating, case for supports reports and formalizing your storytelling so that it just basically levels up your team so that if you're a nonprofit that wants to get to that $1 million mark or get to the $10 million mark, these are the little things that you need to have in place to just kind of help propel you there a lot faster. So thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge today on it. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you for tuning in to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. If you'd like free resources to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark, visit realtomkelly.com/playbooks. And because I'm committed to helping nonprofits maximize their impact and reach as many people as possible, contact us at hello@realtomkelly.com to explore bringing me in to speak at your next event. And as always, I'm looking forward to sharing more transformative insights with you on our next episode.